My daughter-in-law laughed at my tiny savings and bragged about the luxury apartment she was applying for upstairs. She had no idea that the incompetent landlord she kept complaining about was actually sitting right across the table from her. On the morning everything began to shift, I woke up unusually early. The sky outside my window was still a deep blue, the kind that belongs more to night than day. I sat on the edge of my bed and allowed myself a long breath. My joints complained, but softly. I've always appreciated that about my body. It whispers before it ever screams. I made coffee the way I always do, 1 scoop too much because I like it strong. Toasted bread with a thin layer of butter. I stood at the counter while eating, listening to the pipes hum through the walls. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed. Someone's alarm went off. The building was waking up. At 8 o'clock, I put on my coat and went downstairs to pick up a package. The young woman in 2B, Lena, passed me in the lobby and waved. "Morning," she said, cheerful as a songbird. "Morning, dear." She carried a baby on her hip, a heavy diaper bag on the other. Exhaustion clung to her like perfume, but she still smiled. I liked her instantly the first week she moved in. As I reached the mailboxes, she hesitated. "Thank you again," she said softly. "For last month, really, you saved us." I blinked. "You don't need to thank me anymore. Things happen." But she shook her head firmly. Still, it meant a lot. Before I could respond, the door swung open and a gust of cold wind blew in. Along with it came Fiona. Her heels clicked like accusations on the marble floor. "Oh," she said, looking between us. "I didn't realize you two were chatting." Lena greeted her politely, then hurried upstairs. Fiona's eyes narrowed. What was that about? "Just neighborly talk," I said. She folded her arms. "It sounded like more than that. She said you saved them. What did she mean? Did you lend them money? Mom, we've talked about this." I resisted the urge to sigh. I didn't lend anyone money. She didn't believe me. I could see it in the way she pressed her lips together, as if holding in a reprimand. "Well," she said, "Daniel and I wanted to invite you for lunch tomorrow. There's something we need to discuss with you." "About your financial stability." I paused. "My what?" She gave a tight smile. "Don't worry, we'll explain everything tomorrow." The elevator dinged upstairs. A dog barked twice. Someone turned on a vacuum cleaner. Ordinary sounds, but under them, something in me shifted. Fiona walked out of the lobby without waiting for me to answer. I watched her leave, her silhouette sharp against the morning light. Quietness may have been my shield, but that day, for the first time in years, it felt like something else. A warning, a prelude. Something was coming, and it was going to be loud. I woke the next morning with a heaviness in my chest, the sort that feels like a stone has settled behind your ribs. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like anticipation, a quiet readiness born from years of swallowing small humiliations and pretending they didn't scratch the inside of my throat. Before I left for Daniel and Fiona's place, I took my time with the morning routines that grounded me. I swept my balcony. I wiped dust from the picture frame of my late husband, my Thomas. I found my reflection in the hallway mirror and studied the woman staring back. Neat silver hair, soft lines at the corners of my eyes, a blouse too plain for Fiona's taste, but perfectly fine for mine. Thomas would have chuckled and said, "You look like you mean business," even if all I'd done was brush my hair. He always saw something strong in me, something I didn't often see in myself. I pulled on my coat, tucked my keys into my pocket, and stepped into the stairwell. The building smelled faintly of fresh bread. Someone must have been baking. The familiar scent calmed me. But as I walked the short distance to Daniel's house, my heartbeat thrummed with a kind of muted tension. Fiona had said they wanted to discuss my financial stability. The phrase alone made my skin prickle. I'd always lived modestly, by choice. After Thomas died, I found solace in simplicity. A smaller life is sometimes easier to manage. Less noise, less risk, less room for disappointment. But Fiona equated simplicity with failure. When I reached their house, the door opened before I had even knocked. Fiona's smile was too bright to be real, stretched tight like a tablecloth pulled over a stained surface. "Come in," she said. "We've been waiting." Daniel appeared behind her, offering a quick, distracted kiss on my cheek. He looked tired. Edges of stress carved faint shadows beneath his eyes. I wondered if he even knew what this little financial stability talk was truly about, or if he was simply following Fiona's lead the way he always did. They ushered me into the dining room. The table was set for 3, but the food remained untouched. I noticed Fiona sitting at the head, her usual place, while Daniel sat beside her instead of across from her, as if they were presenting a united front. I sat opposite them. "So," Fiona began, clasping her hands, "we're really glad you came. This is something we've been meaning to discuss for a while." Her tone suggested I should be grateful for this intervention. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, we're concerned." "About what?" I asked gently. "Your finances," Fiona answered for him. Daniel didn't protest. She continued, "We've noticed you don't really plan for the future the way some people your age should. You don't have a proper retirement fund. Your savings account is, well, it's tiny." There it was, the word she chose yesterday, tiny. As if my life were something she could shrink between her manicured fingers. I felt my spine straighten, a quiet reflex. Fiona leaned forward. "You're not getting any younger, and Daniel and I, well, we worry about the burden you might become." Such a smooth delivery, polished, practiced. I stayed silent, letting her fill the room with her own assumptions. "And your apartment, I mean, it's nice enough, I suppose, but the rent in that building is high for someone with limited savings. We think it's best if you consider moving to a more affordable area." My fingers curled slightly against my lap. "Rent?" Daniel nodded sympathetically. "Mom, we know it's expensive. You don't have to pretend it's not. Fiona did some research and found several much cheaper places outside the city. You'd save so much." I almost laughed. Almost. Not because they were wrong about the prices, but because they were so disastrously, catastrophically oblivious to the truth. Fiona reached for a stack of printed documents on the table. "Here are some options. They're small, but given your situation." "My situation?" I interrupted softly. She blinked at me. "Well, yes, limited income, limited savings, and the fact that you'll probably need help soon." "I'll need help?" Fiona didn't catch the warning in my voice. "Naturally. I mean, no offense, but..." There it was, the phrase that always precedes something offensive. "You're alone, and things could get expensive. Daniel and I want to make sure you don't." She paused again, performing a delicate grimace. "A financial strain." Daniel looked pained, but said nothing. I turned to him. "Is that what you think, that I'm a strain?" His mouth opened, then closed. He looked away. Fiona took this as her cue to continue. "You shouldn't feel ashamed. Some people just don't manage money well. And honestly, you've lived in that apartment for so long without ever upgrading anything. Most people your age have assets, investments, something." She gave a small, pitying shrug. "But you, well, you have your tiny savings account, and that's it." Something inside me went very still. Not broken, not hurt, just still, like a lake just before a storm breaks. "Fiona," I said quietly, "what exactly do you want from me?" She smiled sweetly. "Transparency. It's for your own good. If you show us your accounts and let us help you restructure your finances, you'll be safer. And moving out of your building is part of that. You're living above your means." Daniel reached for my hand, but his touch felt foreign. "Mom, don't get upset. We're trying to help." Fiona nodded with exaggerated sympathy. "Yes, we just don't want to be surprised later." Surprised later. I understood then. This wasn't concern. This was positioning, anticipation of inheritance, preparation for control. "My savings may be small," I said calmly. Fiona exhaled in triumph, as if I'd just confirmed her thesis. "But," I continued, "why is that a problem for you?" She blinked. Because we care? No, I said, still gentle. Try again. The edge in my voice froze both of them. I waited, but neither offered a real answer. So I stood. Thank you for the lunch invitation. My chair slid back with a soft scrape. But I need to go. Daniel rose too. Mom, it's fine, I said. I appreciate the effort. Fiona looked startled. She wasn't expecting me to leave with dignity. She was expecting defensiveness, maybe tears, but quietness, my old armor, settled around me again, and this time it felt sharper. Before I reached the door, she called after me. "Oh, and one more thing," she said brightly, as if she were offering a parting treat. "Next month, Daniel and I are applying for an apartment in your building, one of the renovated ones, finally moving into a place that suits us." I paused. "The renovated ones?" I repeated softly. She didn't notice the shift in my tone. "Yes, the landlord may be slow and incompetent, but at least the units are big enough for people who actually plan for their future. We'll be right upstairs from you soon. Isn't that lovely?" Her smile, wide, triumphant, cut through the last of my restraint. I left without answering. Outside, the cold air hit my face, sharp and bracing. They mocked my savings, insulted my choices, pitied my life, and they had absolutely no idea at all that the building they were so desperate to live in was mine. Every brick, every hallway, every door, owned quietly, owned completely, owned by the woman with the tiny savings. When I returned home after the lunch, if one could call that spectacle a lunch, I felt the walls of my apartment greet me like old friends. They stood exactly as they always had, indifferent to judgment, sturdy in their silence. I rested my hand on the doorframe as I stepped inside, drawing in a long breath that filled my lungs and steadied my pulse. My apartment wasn't large. Fiona loved reminding me of that, as though square footage had ever been a measure of dignity. The kitchen smelled faintly of chamomile from the tea I brewed that morning. The curtains swayed a little, stirred by a breeze sneaking through the cracked window. Everything was unchanged. Everything was where it belonged. Except me. Inside, something shifted, something that had been sleeping for a long time. For years, maybe decades, I allowed people to underestimate me. It was easier, safer. There was no reason to correct assumptions when those assumptions protected my privacy, my peace, and the very foundation of my life. But Fiona's words lingered in my ears like an echo that refused to fade. Tiny savings, burden, living above your means. I could almost hear Thomas chuckling from the picture frame beside the plant stand. "Let them talk," he used to say. "People reveal themselves that way." I touched the glass over his face. "You wouldn't believe her," I whispered. But truthfully, he would. He had always seen through people faster than I did. The events replayed in my mind: Fiona's smug pity, Daniel's quiet compliance, the stack of printed apartment listings, and the audacity of their assumption that my financial decisions required their intervention. And then the announcement. They were applying for one of my apartments, the renovated ones, she said. I could still hear her voice dripping with superiority as she described the landlord, slow, incompetent, as though she were describing a lazy animal rather than the woman who had quietly run this building for decades. I sat down at my table, hands folded, eyes staring at nothing. For years, I had played small, not because I was small, but because solitude had taught me to value privacy above pride. But humiliation, that was something different, something corrosive, something dangerous, and Fiona wielded it like a weapon. The truth was simple. I owned the building, all of it, every unit, every hallway, every fire escape stair, every square meter of parking. After Thomas and I bought it in our early years, using nearly all our savings, we spent decades improving it, renting it out, shaping it into a stable source of income. But when he died, I made a choice. I let the property management company handle the public-facing responsibilities. I stepped back into the background where peace lived. I signed paperwork quietly. I attended meetings quietly. I approved repairs quietly. Quiet became my language. Quiet became my power. But now, quiet was no longer working. I stood and walked to the small cabinet where I kept my paper files, an old habit from a time before everything lived on screens. Inside were folders meticulously labeled taxes, deeds, tenant agreements, renovation plans. I pulled out the thick blue folder labeled asterisk ownership and documents asterisk and placed it on the table. The papers whispered as I flipped through them. The deed, my signature, the management contract, annual reports, maintenance schedules. So much weight hidden under humble appearances. A knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door to see Lena from 2B holding a container of homemade soup. "Sorry," she said, breathless. "I wasn't sure if you were home. I made extra and thought you might want some." She was younger, overwhelmed, always juggling her baby and work, yet she carried more kindness in her hands than Fiona had ever held in her entire spirit. "Come in for a moment," I said gently. She stepped inside, setting the container down. Her tired eyes scanned my face. "Everything okay?" she asked. I hesitated, but only briefly. I had no intention of revealing my personal affairs, not yet, not even to her. But her concern touched a part of me that had felt cold since the previous day. "I'm fine," I said, "just thinking about some things." Her expression softened. "If it's about the rent, please know I didn't mean to cause trouble yesterday. I hope your daughter-in-law didn't misunderstand." I smiled weakly. She misunderstands many things. She laughed under her breath. "She looked like she was interrogating you." She was. Lena paused. "If she thinks you're struggling financially, well, I hope you don't let her talk down to you. You're one of the most put-together people I know." The compliment startled me. "You think so?" "Of course. You handle everything with such calm. It's impressive." Calm, yes, my armor, my silence. But calm can also be the surface of deep, ancient water, still, but with currents strong enough to reshape a shoreline if disturbed. "Thank you," I said softly. She left soon after, and I watched her climb the stairs with her baby, her footsteps disappearing into the hum of the building. When the door clicked shut, I stared at the blue folder again. I had planned to keep the truth hidden until the day I died. I even wrote a note in my will explaining everything, so Daniel would understand later, after he had grown into a version of himself that might appreciate the quiet strength it took to preserve something for decades. But now, he wasn't growing. He was bowing. To Fiona, to her judgment, to her greed. And Fiona? She was already trying to push me out of my own building without knowing it was mine. The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. Instead, I opened my laptop. My hands were steady as I typed the manager's email address. The renovations I had approved last month were beginning soon. That meant tenant notifications, inspections, and, most importantly, unit access, including the unit Daniel and Fiona wanted. I pressed *send on a simple message. "Please prepare the renovation schedule for my review. Include all application requests for the premium units." My ownership required anonymity, yes, but anonymity did not mean powerlessness. I closed the laptop. Then, as I poured myself a cup of tea, I realized something quietly electrifying. For the first time in years, I wasn't simply living inside my own quietness. I was directing it, turning it, sharpening it. Because if Fiona wished to mock my savings, if she wished to belittle my life, if she wished to treat me as a burden, an inconvenience, an afterthought, then she was about to learn a truth she would not forget. The woman she underestimated, the woman with the tiny savings, owned the ground beneath her feet, and the walls she coveted, and the future she thought she controlled. The next few days moved with a strange, deliberate slowness, the kind that makes ordinary chores feel strangely significant. Every sound in the building, every footstep, every faucet running, every low hum of conversation through the walls felt more pointed, more layered, as though my senses had sharpened. Fiona's words still rattled around inside me, echoing off old memories and newer wounds. Tiny savings, burden, living above your means. Each phrase curled into my mind like a thorned vine. I didn't dwell in anger, though. Anger was noisy. And I have never been a noisy woman. Instead, what stirred inside me was something quieter, denser, older, a resolve that had slept beneath layers of modest living and gentle pacifism. But life has a way of shaking old bones awake. On Wednesday morning, I headed downstairs to check my mail, expecting nothing more interesting than a water bill or a grocery store flyer. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent. Someone must have done their laundry early. My slippers whispered over the floor as I reached the mailboxes. Inside mine sat a thick envelope from the property management company. Renovation schedules, applications attached. I held it for a moment, the weight of it balanced on my palm. So much irony wrapped in a single envelope. Upstairs, a door opened, followed by light footsteps. I recognized them even before I turned. Lena, with her baby on her hip, a grocery bag dangling from her elbow. "Morning," she said, slightly breathless. "Morning, dear." She offered a tired smile. "I swear I've been running around since sunrise, and Leo decided 5 a.m. was the perfect time for a philosophical meltdown." The baby gurgled, unbothered by his own alleged crisis. As she adjusted him, a small envelope slipped from her grocery bag and fell at my feet. I bent to pick it up before she could juggle something else precariously out of balance. When she saw what I'd retrieved, her cheeks flushed. "Oh, thank you. That's actually rent for last month. I wanted to drop it off today. The landlord's assistant asked me to." My hand paused. She reached for the envelope, but slowly, carefully, respectfully, as if she didn't want to intrude. I didn't move. "I thought you paid rent online," I said softly. Her blush deepened. "Normally, yes, but since we were late the previous month, they asked for this payment in person, just to keep track. It's fine. We're getting back on our feet." Her embarrassment wasn't about the money. It was about being overheard, being seen as struggling. She wasn't like Fiona. She didn't wear pride like a crown. She wore it quietly, trying to protect the small bubble of dignity she'd built. I handed the envelope back. "You're doing better than you think." She nodded once, eyes warm with gratitude, then disappeared upstairs. When she was gone, I stared at the envelope in my own hand, the management company's envelope, and felt something shift again. The building wasn't just a place I owned. It was a place where stories like Lena's unfolded daily. People who tried, people who struggled but remained kind, people whom Fiona would dismiss as beneath her. I carried the envelope upstairs, sat at my table, and slid it open with a butter knife. Out slid several forms, clipped neatly together, renovation timelines, inspection requests, and finally, tenant applications. Asterisk. I skimmed through them one by one, seeing handwritten notes, photocopied IDs, employment letters. Then I reached it. Fiona's handwriting hit me like the scent of her expensive perfume, sharp, overwhelming, unmistakable. Application for Unit 4A, Premium Renovation. The top line read, occupants, Fiona Rhodes, Daniel Rhodes. Her name listed first, of course. Below it, I found her income declaration. Influencer lifestyle consultant. I almost snorted. Fiona's consulting consisted mostly of taking pictures of herself drinking overpriced lattes and posting captions about building your dream life. Her employment letter was airy, vague, borderline laughable. Daniel's, on the other hand, was solid. His tech job paid respectably, but not enough to sustain the lifestyle Fiona insisted they deserved. Then I reached the section titled Asterisk Additional Applicant Notes, and my breath left my chest, not in shock, but in a kind of fascinated disbelief. She had written, "We believe we are ideal tenants for this luxury unit. The current residents in the building are fine, but we represent a higher standard. We hope the landlord considers the value of having stable, forward-thinking tenants who can uplift the building's quality." Uplift the building's quality? My building, my tenants, my livelihood. Her arrogance was a living thing, growing, stretching, spilling out of the boundaries of the page. And still, she had no idea. I turned to the next page. Special requests. Given our lifestyle needs, We request permission to begin early upgrades to the unit, lighting, fixtures, and space adjustments, ideally before move-in. We also hope the landlord is willing to be flexible regarding noise or temporary disruptions during our custom renovations. My fingers tightened around the paper. Custom renovations, noise disruptions, lifestyle needs, all for a unit she did not and would not ever be approved for. The absurdity threatened to make me laugh, but laughter would not have been honest. What I felt wasn't amusement. It was a rising, potent calm, a calm with edges. I set the papers down, aligning their corners with careful precision, and poured myself a cup of warm tea. As I sipped, I heard the faint creak of floorboards from upstairs. Someone walking, someone vacuuming, someone living a quiet life in my building. Lives Fiona wanted to improve. Lives she would trample over if allowed. But she would not be allowed. Not in my building, not in my lifetime. A knock sounded at my door just as I took another sip. When I opened it, an older gentleman stood there, Mr. Kraus from 5C, one of my longest tenants. His gait was slow, his smile gentle. "Sorry to bother you," he said. "Is this yours?" He held up a misdelivered letter. I took it. "Thank you. How's the knee?" "Ah," he winced theatrically. "Still arguing with me every morning. But otherwise, can't complain." I smiled. "Let me know if the lift gives you trouble again." He paused. "You always say that, as if you have some magical influence over the building." I shrugged, letting the corner of my mouth lift. "You never know." He chuckled and shuffled away. When his footsteps faded, I closed the door, slowly, deliberately. Fiona saw rent. She saw smallness. She saw weakness. What she would soon see, what she would choke on, was truth. Quietly kept, quietly sharpened, quietly waiting. And the irony, so rich it almost tasted sweet, was this. She thought she was climbing upward. She thought she was rising, but she had built her little throne on a foundation she didn't understand. A foundation with my name on it. And soon, she would feel it shift beneath her feet. Friday arrived with a pale, washed-out sky, and a wind that seemed to tug at the edges of everything, curtains, jackets, thoughts. It was the kind of wind that felt restless, impatient, as though it knew something was coming long before anyone else did. I felt it too. Not dread, not even anger anymore, just a quiet inevitability. At 10 that morning, as arranged, my accountant and attorney were scheduled to meet me in my apartment. This was not unusual. We met twice a year to review the building's finances, discuss repairs, update legal documents. To them, I was simply a widowed property owner, modest in temperament, reliable, introverted but meticulous. They never questioned my desire for privacy. They respected it, unlike some. I tidied the kitchen before they arrived, smoothing the tablecloth, aligning the chairs, wiping crumbs no one else would have noticed. My husband used to tease me about these habits. "Presentation matters," he would say with a sly smile, even when the audience is only you. At precisely 10, there was a knock. Not tentative, professional. I opened the door to see the familiar pair, Mr. Vogt, my attorney, tall, thin as a winter tree, glasses perched precariously on the tip of his nose, and next to him, Sabine, my accountant, practical shoes, warm smile, sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Good morning," I said. "Good morning," they chimed together. Mr. Vogt entered with his usual understated politeness. Sabine rolled in her small trolley bag filled with binders, receipts, updated spreadsheets. The moment she stepped into my apartment, she inhaled deeply. "It always smells like chamomile in here," she said. "I don't know how you manage it." "I drink a lot of tea," I reply. We settled at the table. Sabine began organizing documents with her characteristic efficiency. Mr. Vogt removed his glasses and cleaned them with the edge of his sleeve, a gesture he always did before discussing anything important. "I received the renovation timeline this week," he began. "Everything is on track, but there are some financial adjustments we should discuss." I nodded. I assumed so. Sabine opened a binder and turned it toward me. Inside were pages of neatly printed updates, repair costs, projected rental increases after renovations, tenant payment histories, maintenance fees, and revenue totals. The numbers told a story far different from the one Fiona had crafted in her head. Overall, Sabine said, tapping the page, the building remains stable, exceptionally stable actually. The new insulation will reduce heating expenses by roughly 15%, and once Unit 4A is renovated, you can expect a significant increase in annual income. Unit 4A, the unit Fiona believed she deserved. I felt a small flicker of ironic amusement. Mr. Vogt cleared his throat. Now, we should discuss the matter of your will. I stiffened slightly. He noticed. You mentioned you were considering adjustments, he said gently. This is, of course, entirely up to you. We are not pressuring you, simply following up. My will, the document that held the sum of my life's decisions. For years, Daniel had been the sole beneficiary. It was natural, expected. Thomas had wanted it that way, believing that our son would continue the legacy of kindness and responsibility he tried so hard to instill. But Thomas had never met a woman like Fiona. I haven't decided yet, I said truthfully, but I've been thinking. A wise approach, Sabine said kindly. Life changes, circumstances evolve, families evolve. Families evolve, yes. Into what, though? That was the question that sat like a weight in my chest. Sabine offered a gentle smile. You have time. We can revisit this next month. Mr. Vogt nodded. Absolutely, no rush. I appreciated them for that, for their neutrality, their lack of intrusion. They did not ask about Daniel. They did not pry into my personal life. Their focus remained strictly practical, strictly professional. But then Sabine leaned back in her chair with a curious expression. I did want to ask about the rental applications, she said. Specifically, one that came through this week for Unit 4A. Her eyes flicked to me. I paused. Yes? It's from your son and his wife. So she had noticed. Sabine always noticed. Mr. Vogt looked mildly surprised. I wasn't aware of that. Sabine continued calmly. We haven't processed the approval yet because it requires your signature. And given what you've told us in previous meetings, I assumed you'd want to review it personally. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes held something else. Something like caution? Would you like to see it now? She asked. I folded my hands on the table, took a slow breath, and said, yes, bring it here. She slid the application toward me. I didn't need to read it again. I had memorized most of it. But seeing it printed officially with my son's name under his wife's handwriting stirred something painful in me. Not anger, grief. Because even if Fiona had devised every manipulative detail, Daniel had allowed it, signed it, endorsed it. They wanted to live in my building. They wanted to move up. They wanted to reshape their life on a foundation they did not know was mine. And they believed I should move out. Sabine watched me gently. If you decline their application, the reason will not be disclosed to them. It will simply be marked as not approved. Your anonymity will remain intact. I nodded. Silence settled between us, thick, contemplative, almost heavy. Finally, I asked, out of curiosity, what makes a tenant ideal, in your opinion? Sabine blinked, surprised by the question. Ideal? Yes. She thought for a moment. Someone who pays reliably, treats the building respectfully, and doesn't disturb others. Someone who understands that home is shared space. I nodded slowly. Someone who values kindness. She smiled softly. Yes, that too. Then I suppose, I said, I already know what to do. Vogt cleared his throat delicately. Shall we proceed with the financial review? We moved on to numbers, percentages, future projections, but my mind drifted in and out, anchored only loosely by the sound of paper shuffling and pen scratching. Because beneath all the practical business, a deeper truth crystallized. Daniel and Fiona wanted a future built with bricks I had bought, walls I had protected, income I had nurtured, and they wanted me gone from it. They didn't know that pushing me out of my own building wasn't just ungrateful, it was impossible. We wrapped up the meeting around noon. Sabine gathered her binders. Mr. Vogt slipped his papers into his briefcase. As they prepared to leave, Sabine paused at the doorway. If I may say something, she said, lowering her voice, you've done an extraordinary job managing this property. Not many people preserve stability this well. Don't let anyone make you feel less capable than you are. Her words reached a place inside me I hadn't realized was hungry. Thank you, I whispered. After they were gone, I sat in the stillness of my apartment, overlooking the stack of documents they'd left behind. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked. Upstairs, someone laughed. Life continued. But inside me, something had shifted into place with absolute clarity. Daniel and Fiona wanted access to a world they believed belonged to them. But the world did not belong to them. It belonged to me. And soon, they would understand exactly what that meant. The wind had died down by Saturday morning, replaced by an unsettling stillness that clung to the walls like humidity. Even the usual symphony of building noises, the humming pipes, the creaking stairs, the thump of someone's laundry basket being dragged down the hall, seemed subdued, as if the entire structure were holding its breath. I found myself moving slowly that morning, not out of tiredness but thoughtfulness. I watered my plants, I opened the windows, I stitched a loose button back onto an old cardigan. Normal things, quiet things. But beneath every quiet action, tension coiled. Real tension. Tension that smelled like inevitability and tasted like truth getting ready to rise from deep water. At around 11, my phone lit up with Daniel's name. I stared at it for a beat too long. In recent months, his calls had become less frequent, and when they did come, they often carried the faint shadow of Fiona's influence, as if she hovered beside him, silently curating his thoughts. I answered anyway. "Mom," he said, sounding oddly breathless, "are you home? We want to stop by." We, of course. "Yes," I said quietly. "Come up." I had barely set the phone down before a firm knock rattled my door. Fiona didn't like waiting. Patience was not one of her cultivated virtues. I opened the door, and there they stood. Daniel looked uneasy, eyes darting, shoulders tense. A boy caught between two worlds. A man who had forgotten how to stand without leaning on someone else. Fiona, on the other hand, looked victorious. Her smile stretched across her face like a flag planted on a conquered hill. "Hello," she sang as she breezed past me, too familiar, too comfortable for a woman who had no right to feel either. Daniel followed more hesitantly. He glanced at me with something like apology flickering behind his eyes, but it was too dim, too late, too easily smothered by Fiona's presence. I closed the door gently. "We won't take long," Fiona said, waving one manicured hand as though she were sweeping away a trivial inconvenience. "We just have some wonderful news." I exhaled softly, patiently. "What kind of news?" Fiona clasped her hands together dramatically. "We've been approved for the premium apartment in your building." My building? My apartment? Approved? I felt my heart beat slow, not speed. Slow like the moment right before a glass slips from someone's fingers, gravity taking its final breath before the shatter. Daniel stepped forward. "We're moving in next month, Mom. Isn't that great? We'll be so close to you." Close, not in the emotional sense, of course. Proximity was not closeness, not warmth, not love. Fiona continued. "Honestly, it's such a relief. I was beginning to wonder if the landlord even knew how to do their job. The process took forever. But it's done now." Her tone sharpened on the word forever, asterisk digging into it as though the simple length of time offended her. I raised an eyebrow. "You've been approved? Officially?" She mistook my calm for surprise, maybe admiration. "Yes," she said proudly, lifting her chin. "The clerk at the property office told us yesterday. They said we're top candidates. In fact, he hinted that they were considering offering us a long-term contract." My lips twitched. Ah, so that's what happened. A clerk, likely inexperienced, likely eager to please, had given them a premature verbal assurance, probably misinterpreting something in the system,
probably assuming that tenants who presented themselves as upscale lifestyle influencers were desirable. I would have to have a word with management, but not yet. Fiona wasn't finished. And honestly, she went on, stepping closer, I think it's for the best. Having us in a nicer unit will elevate the whole building, make it more modern, more refined. Elevate, refined. Every word she chose sounded like a dagger dipped in sugar. I crossed my arms lightly. And what made them choose you, do you think? Oh, she said with a breathy laugh, isn't it obvious? I waited. She gestured vaguely around the room. I mean, just look at the place. The building needs people like us, people who know how to improve things, who don't settle. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with a sorrow so old it felt like the echo of a wound that had healed crooked. Improve things? I repeated softly. Of course, she said brightly. We'll be renovating the unit, bringing it up to modern luxury standards. The landlord will thank us. I imagined her renovations, walls torn out, fixtures replaced, noise spilling down the hall, disruption, interference, tenants complaining, tenants I had quietly cared for years, people who trusted me, even if they didn't know it. Then, as if she hadn't already fried every nerve in my body, she added, and when you move out, whenever that is, the apartment you're in now could finally be updated too. I've heard the landlord doesn't invest enough in the older tenants, so it'll be good for everyone. Move out. Move out. She said it as casually as if suggesting I change my hairstyle. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Fiona. What? She snapped lightly. She knows it's true. She can't stay in that little apartment forever. That little apartment. My home. My place of mourning. My place of healing. My place of remembering. 30 years of memories reduced to little. For a moment, the apartment felt smaller, not physically, but symbolically, compressed by her dismissal. But then something inside me, something ancient and unbreakable, rose like a tide. Fiona, I said quietly, I'm curious. She turned, smugness dripping from her expression.
Yes? What do you think will happen in that building once you move in? She blinked, surprised by the question. Well, obviously, the landlord will be thrilled to have tenants of our caliber, and I assume the rest of the residents will appreciate our improvements. I nodded slowly, patiently. My improvements, I said softly. My residents. She frowned. What are you talking about? Something in my tone had finally pierced her confidence. Good. She wasn't ready. Not yet, but she would be. Daniel stepped forward again, awkward and unsure. Mom, we just wanted to share the news and let you know we're here to help with your situation, too. Situation. Another word she had planted in his vocabulary. I gave him a long, steady look. Then I smiled. A real smile, the kind that comes from knowing a secret so heavy, so vast, it sits in your chest like a second heartbeat. Thank you, I said. I appreciate the update, truly. Fiona exhaled, relieved. Good. I was hoping you'd be mature about it. Mature. She had no idea how mature I was about to be. They left soon after, chattering to each other about lighting fixtures and marble countertops and paint samples, as if they'd already moved in, as if the world had already rearranged itself to accommodate their desires. When the door closed behind them, the silence in my apartment swelled, warm and dense. Their confidence wasn't just misguided, it was borrowed, bought on credit from a reality that didn't belong to them. And soon, very soon, the invoice would come due. I sat at my table, picked up a pen, and wrote a short, simple message to the property management company. Do not finalize the approval for Unit 4A. I will review this application personally. Then I signed it, not as a tenant, not as a mother, not as a woman with tiny savings, but as the owner of the building, of the truth, of their future, and the storm to come.
Sunday arrived draped in that soft, deceptive quiet that makes you believe the world is gentle. The sun poured through my kitchen window in thin, golden ribbons, illuminating the dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. For a moment, just a moment, I allowed myself to breathe in the stillness, because I knew what was coming. A storm doesn't announce itself with thunder.
It announces itself with silence. Around noon, I was invited, though summoned would have been a more accurate word, to a family gathering at Daniel and Fiona's house. A casual lunch, Fiona's message read, nothing formal, just everyone coming together. Everyone, meaning her parents, her sister, a cousin or two, people who like to pretend they were far more important than they were. I almost declined, but then I realized something. Some events deserve to be witnessed from the inside, especially cruelty, especially arrogance, especially the beginning of someone's undoing. So I went. Daniel opened the door, cheeks flushed, smelling faintly of aftershave and nervousness. "Mom, you made it." Fiona appeared behind him like a brightly colored storm cloud in heels. "Hello," she said, her smile tight but triumphant. "Come in, we're just getting started." She led me to the dining room, where her family sat around a long table arranged with care, an arrangement designed to impress, to perform, to sparkle. Fiona loved a stage. I recognized her mother immediately, Marlene, a woman whose jewelry could blind a small child and whose opinions could flatten one. Her father, Kurt, wore an expensive watch and the expression of a man who believed the world owed him respect purely because he demanded it. Their daughter, Elise, lounged in her chair scrolling through her phone, bored before the event had even begun. "Ah," Marlene said when I walked in, her tone overly bright, "the mother-in-law has arrived," as if I were a character entering a play. "Good afternoon," I replied, taking my seat at the far end of the table. The food looked beautiful. Fiona had made sure of that. She always cared more about the aesthetic than the taste. Everything was plated like an advertisement for a lifestyle blog. Perfect symmetry, perfect color balance, perfect pretension. Small talk trickled around the table at first. Weather, work, trends, a vacation someone was planning. I kept quiet, listening, watching, letting myself blend into the background like a harmless painting on the wall. But Fiona didn't like when I blended. She needed me visible in order to feel superior. She waited for the perfect moment, and then she struck. "So," she said loudly, lifting her glass, "since we're all here today, I thought it would be good to talk about something important." Daniel's posture stiffened. Kurt raised an eyebrow. Marlene leaned forward, hungry for drama. I felt the room tilt ever so slightly, as though the air itself braced for impact. Fiona looked directly at me. "It's about Mom's financial situation." The word mom felt sour in her mouth, and she spoke it with a strain of forced politeness that almost amused me. Almost. Daniel attempted a weak smile. "Fiona." "No, darling," she said sweetly. "This is the right time. Everyone here understands how families need to support each other, and your mother could use some support." She waited a beat, letting her implication hang in the air like a chandelier made of shame. Then she continued, "We all know her savings are, well," she made a small, pitying face that made my stomach turn. Tiny. There it was again, that word, her favorite weapon. A ripple of whispers passed around the table. Elise actually snorted. Kurt leaned back and crossed his arms, clearly entertained. "That's unfortunate," he said with a smug sigh. "At her age, you'd think she would have managed things better." Marlene nodded vigorously. "It's a burden for elderly parents don't prepare." Elderly, burden, prepare. I felt each word drop into the air with the weight of stones being tossed casually into a pond. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, because saying nothing had become his specialty. Fiona pressed on. "That's why Daniel and I are stepping in to help. We're encouraging her to move to a more affordable apartment, something smaller, something manageable." Her parents nodded approvingly, as if this were a humanitarian mission. "And of course," Fiona said, smiling falsely, "we'll check on her often, make sure she's okay." The table murmured with approval. As though I were a child, as though I were incompetent, as though I were a charity case. Then Fiona added the cruelest slice of all. It's really for the best. I mean, she's been living in that building for decades and has nothing to show for it. Some people just don't understand how to invest. A soft, subtle hush fell over the table. Something had shifted. The air grew heavier, thicker, but they didn't recognize it. Fiona certainly didn't. She was too busy basking in the glow of her own cruelty. So don't worry, she concluded brightly. We'll handle everything. She won't have to stress about money anymore. The condescension in her tone was so thick I could have carved it like cake. There were 100 things I could have said, 100 truths I could have revealed, but I didn't, not yet. Storms do not break at the first rumble. They gather, they pulse, they darken the sky little by little, and when they finally arrive, they do not whisper, they roar. Instead, I simply reached for my water glass, lifted it with steady fingers, and took a sip so calm it could have made the entire table uncomfortable, if they had been paying attention. I set the glass down. The sound of it touching the table was soft, barely audible, but to me it rang like a bell marking the moment the tide turned. Later, when dessert was served and the conversation drifted elsewhere, Fiona leaned toward me, voice dripping honey. "I hope you understand we're doing this for you," she said. "For me?" I repeated softly. "Yes, of course," she said. "We can't let you stay somewhere you can't afford, right?" I smiled, a small, deliberate, dangerous smile. Right. Her eyes brightened, mistaking agreement for surrender. But what she didn't realize was that something inside me, something long dormant, something I inherited from the quiet strength of women who lived and survived before me, had awakened. And that something was done absorbing hits, done being underestimated, done being handled. By the time I left their house and stepped into the crisp evening air, I felt lighter. Not because their words had lost their sting, but because their ignorance had clarified something in me. They had crossed a line, and I was no longer interested in stepping back. They weren't just ungrateful, they were walking toward a cliff's edge with their eyes closed. And I, quiet, patient, underestimated me, had finally decided to stop warning them. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of wet concrete, the kind that makes the whole world feel muted. The air was cool when I cracked open my window, carrying in the faint scent of early rain, a promise of cleansing, renewal, consequence. I moved through my apartment slowly, deliberately, aware that something in me had crossed an invisible threshold. Not anger, not revenge, nothing fiery or impulsive. Just clarity, a clarity so sharp it no longer needed to raise its voice. At around 9, I received an email from the property management company confirming that all renovation applications, including the one for Unit 4A, were now processed and awaiting the owner's final review. My review, my approval, my signature. Such small actions, such profound consequences. I dressed in a warm cardigan, tied my hair neatly at the back, slipped my documents folder into my bag, and stepped into the hallway. The building was unusually quiet. Even the fluorescent lights hummed at a lower pitch. As I reached the stairwell, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Wait 1 second. It was Lena from 2B, holding her son's stroller with one hand and a diaper bag with the other. "You headed out?" she asked, slightly out of breath. "Yes, dear," I said. "To the property office." Her eyes widened. "Ah, I actually wanted to thank you again. Growing up, my grandparents always told me a landlord's true character shows when tenants struggle. You've always been, well, understanding." My heart tightened. She didn't know. None of them knew. And that anonymity had protected them and me for years. But soon that veil would lift. Slowly, carefully, purposefully. "Take care," I told her gently. She smiled before maneuvering the stroller toward the elevator. "You too. And don't let people talk down to you. You deserve better." It was such a simple sentence, yet it resonated deeper than she could imagine. I left the building, walking the 3 short blocks to the property management office. The wind tousled my hair as I crossed the street, pulling at the edges of my coat. The world felt expectant, as though leaning forward to see what would unfold. Inside, the office hummed with quiet activity, phones ringing softly, keyboards clicking, printers churning like tired factory machines. The front desk clerk, a young man named Tobias, looked up and brightened. "Oh, good morning, Mrs. Rhodes," he said. "You're here for the review?" I nodded. "Yes, I'd like to look at all the pending applications for the renovated units." "Of course." He jogged to the back, retrieved a thick file, and handed it to me with an efficient smile. "Let me know if you need anything." I took a seat in a quiet corner, opened the folder, and began flipping through pages. Tenants I knew well. Tenants who had lived respectfully, quietly, without complaint. Tenants who paid late sometimes but always communicated honestly. Good people. Then, halfway through the stack, I found it. Application for Unit 4A, Fiona Rhodes and Daniel Rhodes. Asterisk. The moment my eyes fell on it, the office door swung open with a gust of cold air, and in came Fiona. Daniel trailed behind her, of course. They hadn't expected to see me, but their timing was impeccable. Fiona's lips parted slightly when she noticed me sitting in the corner, the file open in front of me. For a split second, just one, her composure faltered. Something like confusion flickered across her face before she smoothed it away. Daniel offered a weak smile. "Mom, we didn't know you'd be here." "Review day," I said simply. Fiona walked toward the receptionist. "We're here to check on the status of our application. Tobias said we could stop by." Ah, so she had already built a rapport with the staff, or tried to. Tobias, eager and unaware, said brightly, "Oh yes, I told Mrs. Rhodes you were top candidates. It's just awaiting the owner's signature now." I felt the tension coil tighter. Fiona turned to me, eyes gleaming with smug triumph. "Isn't that wonderful? We should be moving in soon." I closed the folder calmly. "Applications are never final until the owner signs," I said softly. "Yes, but we made a great impression," she replied, crossing her arms. "And they already told us it looks good, so it's really just a formality." A formality? My signature, my approval, my decision. How fascinating that she believed she could speak with such authority in a place she did not understand. Daniel stepped closer. "Mom, once we move in, we can help you with all your paperwork. Fiona's really organized, you know." I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I rose from my chair, closed the folder, and looked at them both with a gentleness that was far more disarming than anger. "Tobias," I said, still keeping my gaze on them, "could you please let the property manager know I'd like to speak with him for a few minutes?" Tobias nodded quickly. "Of course, Mrs. Rhodes." Fiona frowned. "Why? Is something wrong with the application?" I didn't answer. Moments later, the property manager, a sturdy man named Herr Keller, emerged from his office. His face lit up the moment he saw me. "Ah, Frau Rhodes," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "Good to see you." Then he noticed Daniel and Fiona. "Oh," he said politely, "you must be the applicants for 4A." "Yes," Fiona said, stepping forward eagerly. "We're very excited." Herr Keller nodded once, professionally neutral, then turned back to me. "I have your documents ready. Would you like to discuss them inside?" "Yes," I said. And then, before stepping into his office, I added, without raising my voice, without looking back, without emphasizing anything, "I'll only be a few minutes, then we'll finalize everything." Fiona brightened instantly. Good, let her be bright for now. Let her believe she was ascending. Inside Herr Keller's office, I settled into the familiar chair while he collected the papers. We discussed renovation schedules, budget adjustments, and, finally, tenant approvals. When he reached the Rhodes application, he paused. "Is there an issue?" he asked quietly. "No," I said, "no issue, just clarification." He waited, patient, respectful. I tapped the application once with my finger. "This unit," I said gently, "will not be going to them." He didn't flinch. He only nodded. "Understood. Shall I mark it as declined?" "Yes," I said. "Declined. Today." "And the reason to provide if they ask?" I smiled faintly. "The same reason as always," I said. "Owner preference." He nodded again. "Of course. I'll submit it right away." And just like that, it was done. Quietly. cleanly, irreversibly. He stamped the page, wrote the notation, and closed the file. When I stepped back into the main office, Fiona's face was practically glowing. She looked like a woman seconds away from celebration. "Oh, good," she said, stepping toward me with exaggerated relief. "Everything settled?" "Yes," I replied softly, slipping my bag over my shoulder. "Everything is settled." "Wonderful," she said. "We'll start packing soon. I already have mood boards for the renovations. We'll make the place stunning." "Yes," I said again, my voice the calm of deep waters. I walked past her, toward the door, letting the silence stretch behind me like a trailing ribbon. She didn't know, not yet, but she would. Sooner than she realized, because what she thought was a ladder beneath her feet was a ledge, and what she believed was triumph was the quiet before a consequence. On Wednesday evening, as the sky dimmed into a bruised violet and the first street lamps flickered awake, my doorbell rang, not once, twice, sharper the second time, like a question pressed too hard. I set aside my knitting and walked to the door, already knowing who it was. There's a certain flavor to impatience, an energy that leaks through the wood before a word is even spoken. When I opened the door, Fiona stood there, her expression stretched into a strained facsimile of a smile. Daniel hovered behind her, shoulders hunched, eyes apologetic but tired, always tired. "Hi, Mom," Fiona chirped, though her voice carried a metallic edge. "We were in the neighborhood." In the neighborhood? They lived across town. But I stepped back and let them in, because storms should be observed from inside the room, not through a peephole. Fiona entered as if my apartment were a waiting room, space she had to tolerate, not respect. Daniel lingered by the threshold until I gestured for him to come inside. Once they were both seated, Fiona uninvitedly taking my armchair, Daniel choosing the edge of my sofa, they exchanged a glance. A silent communication that looked, to my eyes, like the moment two people decide who will swing the axe. Fiona inhaled dramatically. "So," she began, "we stopped by the property office today." I nodded, settling into the chair opposite her. "Yes." "Yes," she repeated with an aggravated sweetness. "And apparently there's been a mistake." "A mistake," I echoed. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "Mom, they said our application for 4A was declined." "Not approved," Fiona corrected sharply. "They refused to elaborate, which is ridiculous, by the way." I kept my voice soft. "I see." Fiona's eyes flashed, growing colder. "Do you?" Silence folded into the room, unhurried. Then she leaned forward, folding her manicured hands over her knee. "We were told we were top candidates, perfect match. And then suddenly, without explanation, we're denied?" She scoffed. "Something isn't adding up." Daniel exhaled. "Mom, did you hear anything about it? Maybe you know the landlord, or maybe you can talk to them?" Talk to them. Talk to myself. How fascinating, this theater of ignorance. "I review the building's affairs from time to time," I said carefully. "Renovation cycles, tenant conduct, changes in occupancy." Fiona's eyebrows shot up. "You? Review?" "Yes." "Why?" she demanded. "Because I have a vested interest in the building," I said. She narrowed her eyes. "And what does that mean?" "That I care who lives here." A strange expression crossed her face, confusion tangled with indignation. "But why would the landlord care who you care about?" she snapped. "Fiona," Daniel muttered weakly, "let her speak." She ignored him and pressed on. "I mean, with your tiny savings." This time, the phrase didn't sting. It vaporized, like smoke over a flame, because now I stood within my truth, not outside it. "Your savings," she said louder, as if I hadn't heard the first instance. "I mean, you barely qualify to live here yourself. Why would the landlord listen to your input?" Daniel winced. "Fiona, please." "No," she said firmly. "I'm just asking her to be honest. Mom, you know we're right. You're living above your means. We're the responsible ones here. We need that apartment, and it doesn't make sense that they'd pick someone else." I watched her unravel slowly, thread by thread.
Fiona, I said softly, do you want the truth? Her eyes gleamed with a hostile sort of hope. Of course. Are you sure? I asked. Truth has a way of rearranging things. She scoffed. Please, I think we've handled your situation pretty generously already. My situation. My situation. The words slid off her tongue with venom disguised as virtue. Very well, I said, folding my hands in my lap. You should know the landlord did not make a mistake. She blinked. Excuse me? They declined the application. Intentionally. Her voice sharpened. Why? Because it wasn't a good fit. For whom? For the building, I said quietly. She laughed, short and incredulous. We're too good a fit, if anything. We'd improve that whole place. Perhaps that is the issue. Daniel's face paled. Mom, what are you saying? I didn't rush. I let the truth gather in the air, dense and electric. Daniel, I asked gently, how long have you known me? My whole life. Correct. And in all those years, have I ever lived irresponsibly? He swallowed. No. Have I ever asked you for money? No. Have I ever failed to provide for myself? No, Fiona cut in. Oh, please, providing for yourself? You've been sliding by with almost nothing saved. You live in that tiny old apartment and act like that tiny apartment, I said calmly, has been home for 3 decades. Exactly, she cried triumphantly. And you never moved up, never invested, never, Fiona. My tone stopped her mid-sentence. If you truly want to know why the landlord declined your application, I exhaled steadily, it is because I declined it. She stared. Daniel stared. The world itself seemed to pause. You? She repeated, laughing nervously. You declined it? Why would they let you decline anything? You're a tenant. No, I said, softly, sharply, truthfully. I am the owner. Silence cracked open like a fault line. Fiona blinked rapidly, her brain rejecting the information like a foreign object. That's ridiculous, she said, waving dismissively. You own a unit maybe, but I own the entire building. Her mouth hung open. Daniel's eyes widened, hands trembling in his lap. I continued gently, without triumph, without theatrics, just truth. Your savings, I said, appear small because they are not the measure of my wealth. They never were. When your father died, Daniel, he left me our investments, but the most valuable thing he left was this building. We bought it when you were young, paid it off, maintained it, protected it. I paused. I chose to live modestly, quietly, because not every fortune needs to be displayed. Some are meant to be preserved. Fiona's lips quivered. You're lying. Your application, I continued, was reviewed by the management team. Then it was placed on my desk, and I declined it. Why? She whispered, voice cracking. Because, I said slowly, I do not allow tenants who disrespect people. I do not allow selfishness, entitlement, or cruelty to move into a home I built. Not toward my current tenants, I held her gaze. Not toward me. Daniel's breath hitched. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Because, I said softly, I was waiting to see who you would become. The truth sank into him like a stone dropped into deep water. Fiona stood abruptly, knocking over her glass. It shattered on the floor. You can't, she sputtered. You can't just deny us a home. I can, I said, and I have. This isn't fair, she shrieked. No, I replied. What wasn't fair was mocking a woman you believed had nothing. What wasn't fair was trying to push me out of a building I own. What wasn't fair was treating me as an obstacle rather than family. She trembled with fury. Daniel looked shattered. And one more thing, I said quietly. They both looked at me. I have updated my will. Fiona froze. Daniel's breath caught. I no longer leave everything to you, I continued. That decision depends on your actions moving forward. Respect is not an inheritance, it is earned. Fiona's legs buckled. She sank into the armchair, drained of color.
Daniel covered his face with both hands. Silence filled the room like a storm cloud finally breaking. But it wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, powerfully quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a truth too heavy to ignore. After the glass shattered, the pieces glittered across my floor like tiny frozen stars. Fiona stared at them as if they were fragments of her own future, splintered, sharp, suddenly dangerous. Daniel didn't move. He sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face as if he were trying to block out the entire world. The silence that followed wasn't just heavy, it was seismic. A silence that rearranges a room, a life, a family. I remained seated, hands folded neatly in my lap. My pulse steady, my breath calm. The truth sat between us now, no longer a quiet guest, but an undeniable presence. Something that had been waiting patiently for the right moment to rise. Fiona spoke first, but not in words. A strangled sound tore from her throat, part disbelief, part outrage, part something she couldn't yet name. Her fingers clawed at the armrest as she tried to form a sentence. You're not serious," she finally whispered. "I'm very serious," I said. Her eyes darted wildly around the apartment, as if searching for proof, some sign that this was a trick, a joke, a cruel hallucination brought on by embarrassment. But there was nothing here except the truth, settled into the walls like it had always belonged. "You?" she breathed. "You own this building? This old, outdated?" "Be careful," I interrupted softly. "Your words reflect more of you than of the building." She flinched. Not dramatically, just a tiny recoil, almost imperceptible. But I saw it. Daniel lifted his head slowly, his face pale, his eyes rimmed red. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever say?" "That I wasn't poor?" I offered gently. He swallowed hard. "I didn't think you were poor. I just," Fiona said, but the sentence crumbled before he could finish. Fiona whipped toward him. "Don't blame me. How was I supposed to know she was hiding?" "I wasn't hiding," I said. "I was choosing privacy, choosing peace, choosing not to be judged by what I own, but by who I am." Fiona scoffed. "Well, congratulations. You fooled everyone." Her bitterness was fierce, desperate. She was a woman whose entire worldview had just been turned inside out. For someone who values social currency above all else, discovering she had treated a wealthy person like a charity case must have felt like humiliation carved into bone. "You fooled us," she repeated, voice trembling. "You let me think, you let me believe." "That I had tiny savings," I finished softly. Her throat tightened. She couldn't deny it. She couldn't even speak. I continued. "Fiona, your mistake wasn't assuming I lived modestly. Your mistake was believing modesty equaled weakness." She blinked rapidly, fighting the burn in her eyes. "And your second mistake," I said, "was thinking you could mistreat someone simply because you believed they had less than you." Daniel dropped his gaze, shame bowing his shoulders. "But we didn't know," Fiona cried out, almost pleading. "You could have said something. You could have told us. You made me look." "I didn't make you look anything," I replied. "You revealed yourself." The room tightened around that sentence. Fiona pushed herself to her feet so abruptly the chair scraped harshly across the floor. She swayed slightly, her breath uneven. "This isn't fair. You can't do this. You can't just deny us the apartment. You shouldn't have that power." "I do have that power," I said softly, "because I earned it, because I worked for it, because your husband's father and I built it." She shook her head violently. "No, Daniel, she can't do this. Tell her she can't." Daniel lifted his eyes to me. The devastation there felt like a small crack in my heart. My son wasn't cruel, not by nature, but he was weak in the ways that matter most. Weak in conviction, weak in the face of pressure, weak in discerning love from manipulation. "Mom," he whispered, "please reconsider." I stood then, slowly, deliberately. The quiet in the room shifted as I rose, gathering around me like a cloak. "Daniel," I said softly, "I love you. That hasn't changed. But the woman beside you has shown me repeatedly that she does not understand respect. She does not understand humility. She does not understand family unless she is at the center of it." Fiona's mouth fell open. "And you," I continued gently, "have allowed her beliefs to shape your own." He closed his eyes, a man trying desperately not to break. "I'm not punishing either of you," I said. "I am protecting my home and my dignity and the people who live in this building." Fiona threw up her hands. "We're not criminals, for God's sake." "No," I said, "but entitlement can be just as destructive." She scoffed again, but the sound was thin, hollow. She was unraveling. "So that's it?" she demanded. "You deny us housing? You deny us inheritance? You just take everything away?" I sighed, a long, quiet sigh that carried 10 years of swallowed truths. "I haven't taken anything," I said. "I have simply stopped giving." That broke her. Her face twisted, not just with anger, but with something deeper, something bruised, something terrified. For a woman who built her identity on appearing superior, losing even imagined status is a devastating fall. Daniel stood abruptly. "We should go." Fiona rounded on him. "No, we're not leaving until—" "Yes," he said quietly, his voice trembling, "we are." He took her arm, not harshly, but firmly, and guided her toward the door. She resisted until the very edge of the frame, then whirled back to me, eyes glistening with fury. "You'll regret this," she spat. I met her gaze, unshaken. "No, Fiona, I regret giving you the opportunity to treat me the way you have." Her breath caught. She didn't expect gentleness to hurt more than anger. She left without another word, letting Daniel pull her down the hallway. But Daniel paused, just once, just long enough to meet my eyes. "Mom," he whispered, voice raw, "I didn't know." I nodded. "I know you didn't." He swallowed thickly. "What do I do now?" "Grow," I said simply. He blinked, eyes shining, then turned and followed his wife. When the hallway fell silent, I closed the door slowly and rested my hand against the wood. Not shaking, not grieving, just breathing, deeply, steadily, freely. My truth was no longer hidden. My dignity was no longer prey. My building was safe, my boundaries restored. I walked to the window and looked out at the street below. The lights glowing softly, the breeze tugging at the leaves of the trees. The world unaware of the quiet revolution that had just taken place in a small apartment. The kind of revolution that doesn't need noise, just truth, and the courage to speak it when the moment arrives. I sat down again, picked up my knitting, and resumed my stitches with hands that felt lighter than they had in years. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, peace settled. Not the peace of silence, but the peace of strength reclaimed. The peace of knowing who I am, and who I will never allow to diminish me again.